breaking news, the New York Times obtained 10 years worth of President Trump's tax information. And these are very important years. We're talking 85 to 1994. I'm literally going through this. This is pretty incredible stuff. What the documents reveal is stunning. So a couple of the headlines: $1 billion in losses. According to the New York Times, the president appears to have lost more money than nearly any other individual American taxpayer. Russ Buettner is a reporter with the New York Times. He just broke the story and joins me on the phone. Okay, Russ, this is incredible. I'm starting to read through all of this. So first, exactly what information did you get?
What we received is a printout of what's known as an IRS transcript. That's the data that the IRS compiles from individual tax returns every year. It has all of the boxes from the 1040 and all the attached schedules. Okay,
so now let me just ask you about this crucial sentence. You're saying $1.17 billion in losses for the decade. Year after year, Mr. Trump, I'm quoting from you, Russ, appears to have lost more money than nearly any other individual taxpayer. You go on to show that in just 2 years, he lost more than double the next biggest loser in this country.
That's right. There's a database the IRS compiles of high-income earners like Mr. Trump. Most of them are business owners like him. They show revenue from what are known as pass-through agency or businesses on their tax returns. And you really just, every year, year after year in this cycle, he is on the outer limits of people who are recording those kinds of losses, and then rolls it over into the next year to where he gets this massive loss for the decade of over $1 billion.
So he's literally the biggest loser. There's quite an irony there. But Russ, you also have something else in here that I think is really important for people trying to understand and you know, Trump over the years. This is something that isn't normal. You talk about how Mr. Trump's primary sources of income changed year after year. 1 year, he earned $67.1 million in salary in just one random year. Another year, he gets $52.9 million in interest income from who knows where when he doesn't in any other year. That stuff is bizarre, and it's not normal, right?
That is incredibly bizarre, and that, I think, was the big shocking thing for us. We sort of knew where he was going to wind up with the $1 billion loss because we had reported that before, but we didn't know the building blocks of it. But the degree to which his sort of primary sources of income just bounce all over the place year after year is really, really stunning. And that interest income one is the one mystery we just really haven't been able to solve. That was a point in time when casino regulators and auditors said he had somewhere between $2 million and $100 million in invested money. And then in 1 year, he's making $50 million in interest income. And those oddities, that's 1 year of salary, the 1 year of extreme interest income, those are what really prop him up in 88 and 89 when all the debt that he took on in building this eclectic empire is really starting to put him underwater.
All right. And so just in terms of your takeaways here, that when people talk about Trump, you know, separate from the image that he projected of himself, right, that, you know, as you quote, you know, when he said there's no one more successful, or, you know, from Newsweek, the quote that you have, I mean, he said a million things like this, right? I'm so successful. I'm so rich. Aside from proving a lot of that to be untrue, you're also pointing out that he was in dire need. He had some serious problems. He was in the red.
He was falling apart, yes. You know, again, every year in this cycle, he's losing money, $50 million a year, $60 million a year. The year that Art of the Deal comes out, when he presents himself as one of the country's great deal makers, that was his best year. He only recorded a loss that year of $4.5 million. Every year, the next year after that, he recorded a loss from his primary businesses of $30 million. And it just got worse, and to the point by 1990, 1991, he's losing more than $250 million in each of those years. Everything is really falling apart. And in the meantime, by comparison, his father is doing quite well.
So I mean, I just think that, again, I want to emphasize what you just said. In the best year that he had, he lost $4.5 million. And yet, are these real losses, Russ, from what you understand? Or, I mean, is this, you know, people look at Trump, they go, okay, this guy's so opaque. You know, he's actually taken in millions of dollars. He's just reporting losses so he doesn't pay taxes. Are both of those things true? He's still taking in a ton even though he's losing?
It's an excellent point. Most of these losses are other people's money. It's money that he borrowed from bondholders, in essence, from banks, and then didn't pay back. The businesses didn't support the debt that he had taken on. And he's not actually losing from his pocket in these years, $250 million a year. He is, in essence, kind of fobbing that off on the banks. And that's the reason that ultimately he gives most of what he had built back to the banks at the end of that cycle.
All right.
And as we reported previously, most people would have incurred some tax exposure from that act, but he managed to avoid that and really paid almost no taxes for this 10-year period.
Right. As you say, what is it, 1.5 million in taxes for the entire time?
In 1 year, yeah. That was 1 year, and the rest of it, nothing, yeah.
All right, Russ, thank you very much. Phenomenal reporting, and thank you very much for this. I want to go now to the former Special Assistant to President George W. Bush, Scott Jennings, and our political commentator and former White House Communication Director, Jen Psaki. You're also CNN political commentator, Scott. So, okay, can I just take a pause here for a second, Scott? This is pretty stunning stuff. I mean, whatever you think the takeaway may be, you're talking about $1 billion in losses and 1 year random numbers from totally different things, north of $50 million. This is not normal.
Well, I just got this a few seconds ago and listened to what the reporter had to say. I read over the story. It looked like some things didn't pan out. It looked like a couple of things did. And it was obviously from a long time ago. I guess if I'm here to analyze the political implications of it, are voters going to look at tax returns that are decades old and take, and put more weight on that than they put on their own personal financial situation, which is probably better based on today's economy? I doubt it. But certainly this is a story the White House is going to have to, talk about over the next few days because it's obviously new information the public hasn't had. Right.
Now, look, you have fair points here, but let me just say, Jen, the 1987 quote, and by the way, there's a million like this since then. We all, including every viewer, could probably basically paraphrase them. But there's no one my age who has accomplished more. You have a guy who's, saying his net worth, are numbers that don't add up even without this information. What do you make of this, Jen? Back to the point here where this is a guy who says money is his thing. This is the Midas touch guy, okay, who lost more money than almost any other American. There are hundreds of millions of us. In 2 years alone, his losses were more than double the next biggest loser in the country.
And Aaron, as you well know, and as Scott knows, he ran as a successful businessman who was going to be bringing the art of the deal making to the White House. And what this exposes, which we've known a little bit from some of the reporting Russ and others have done, is that he's an enormous fraud. He's not somebody who made a significant amount of money and had all of these business successes. As the reporting noted, he paid more, or he had greater losses than any other American. And that's a significant and a stunning fact. In addition, I don't think anyone, not for certainly his opponents, but not even his supporters, will take kindly to the fact that when they're reminded that he didn't pay taxes for the vast majority of these years either. So
he paid in basically it looks like 1 or 2 years. That's it. The rest of them not at all. So Scott, I guess the question is, again, I hear you on the political point, but let's talk about the president when he hears this and he looks at this. Does this to you explain why he doesn't want anyone to have this information? That he was such a loser? The reason I say that word, I'm not trying to be funny. He uses that word all the time. He calls people losers, and he has such disdain and drips with horror when he uses that word. And yet he was literally the biggest loser in the country.
Sure. Look, the political implications of this are if you're spending any hours or days or weeks during a presidential campaign talking about your tax returns from the 1980s instead of, say, the booming stock market today, low unemployment, rising wages, et cetera, then that's a day lost on your campaign. So, yeah, as a raw political matter, you would rather not have to talk about these things because you'd rather talk about people's present situation. So, yeah, that's a very good reason why you wouldn't want them out there.
Do you think, though, there are real questions, though, about then where did he get the money? Where did he get the loans? This actually paints a good picture of an important period of time as to why subsequent to that time he could not get loans from banks because banks don't want to loan to a person that has this record. So he went somewhere. You don't worry about where or why?
Look, I think that somebody with this much money, who's had this much money moving in and out of their accounts over this long a period of time, To my knowledge, he's never done anything illegal. He's never been dinged by the IRS. He has filed all this paperwork, and if it ends up out in the public domain for people to see, I think that's probably fine. I do think that they're going to wind up having to talk about how real estate investors and real estate development people get different tax treatment than average Americans, because that's something folks are probably going to need to hear, which explains why the money moves the way it does.
Which was, of course, perpetuated and exacerbated in the most recent tax bill. Jen?
I was just going to say, I think it's just a lot more significant and problematic for Donald Trump and his team than that. Not only does this kind of fly in the face of how he ran for office, it shows him to be a fraud, but it also shows why he would be vulnerable to interests like Russia and other countries like that who are trying to convince him that they can help him out with his financial problems. We don't know that that happened. We haven't seen all the proof. But look, this is an important piece that I think people will dig further into.
All right, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. Russ is fantastic reporting along with Suzanne Craig. Thanks both. And next.